It was raining over Manhattan that evening, the kind of cold drizzle that made even the city lights look lonely. Inside a quiet corner of the Amber Lounge, a man in a perfectly tailored navy suit sat alone at a table for two. His wristwatch gleamed under the chandelier. An expensive piece, like everything else about him. But the way he stared at the untouched wine glass in front of him, you could tell money didn't buy him peace. That man was Ethan Cole, CEO of Cole Enterprises, one of New York's fastest-growing real estate firms. To the world, he was the face of power, ambition, and success. But tonight, beneath that polished armor, he was just a man waiting for someone who would never come back. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and the beauty of unexpected connections, take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us keep sharing stories that touch hearts and inspire hope. Ethan had been sitting there for almost an hour, staring at the empty chair across from him. It was supposed to be his anniversary dinner. 5 years since his wife Laura had passed away in a car accident that still haunted his nights. Every year, he came to this restaurant, ordered her favorite wine, and sat quietly, alone but somehow closer to her. The waiter didn't even ask anymore, they just knew. But this year, the silence felt heavier. Maybe because his company had just gone through a brutal takeover battle. Maybe because his friends had all drifted away, tired of the man who couldn't move on. Or maybe because deep down, he knew that even success couldn't fill the hollow space inside his heart. Just as he sighed and looked out the rain-streaked window, he heard a small voice beside him, innocent, hesitant, and full of warmth that didn't belong in a place like this. "Sir, can my mommy sit here?" Ethan turned. A little boy, maybe 6 years old, stood near his table. His hair was damp, sticking to his forehead, and his small hand clutched the sleeve of a woman standing behind him. A woman who looked as startled as Ethan felt. She had tired eyes, the kind that held stories of struggle, but they were kind and steady. Her coat was old and soaked, and she seemed out of place in the upscale restaurant. "I'm so sorry," she began softly. "We just needed a place to sit for a moment. We didn't know it was reserved." Ethan blinked, still processing. The little boy smiled up at him, his blue eyes wide and trusting. Something inside Ethan cracked just a little. "No," he said quickly, "it's fine. Please, sit." The woman hesitated, clearly embarrassed, but her son tugged at her hand again, whispering something that made her cheeks flush. She smiled faintly, murmured a thank you, and sat down opposite Ethan. For the first time in 5 years, someone else occupied that seat. The waiter approached with a confused look, but Ethan nodded that everything was fine. He asked for an extra glass of water, and, on impulse, ordered a small plate of pasta for the boy. The woman tried to refuse politely, but Ethan insisted. It was the least he could do. As the minutes passed, they began to talk. Her name was Grace Miller, a single mother who worked 2 jobs to support her son, Liam. She had come to the restaurant only because Liam had insisted on seeing the fancy place with the sparkly lights he'd noticed through the window while they waited for the bus. They hadn't meant to intrude. Ethan listened quietly, every word pulling him deeper into the warmth of a world he'd long forgotten. Grace spoke with humility, apologizing more than she needed to. Ethan noticed the small tear near her coat pocket, the way she shielded her son from cold drafts, and how her hands trembled slightly when she lifted her water glass. There was strength in her fragility, a quiet courage that stirred something deep within him. Liam, on the other hand, was full of life. He giggled at the way the waiter poured water like magic, asked Ethan if he lived in the big shiny buildings outside, and told stories about his school and how he wanted to be an astronaut. Ethan found himself smiling for the first time in months. Then, out of nowhere, the boy asked, "Do you have a kid, sir?" The question hit Ethan like a punch to the chest. He paused, his throat tightening. Grace quickly shushed her son, but Ethan shook his head gently. "No," he said quietly, "not anymore." The table fell silent for a moment. Grace's eyes softened, understanding what his words carried. She didn't press him for details, but her look of compassion said everything, and somehow, that silence felt less empty than the one he'd known all evening. After dinner, when Grace tried to pay for their food, Ethan stopped her. "Please," he said, "it's on me." She protested, of course, but he smiled. A real one this time. Think of it as a good evening shared. As they left, Liam turned and hugged Ethan's leg. "Thank you, mister." Mommy smiled today. She doesn't smile a lot. That simple line left Ethan frozen in place long after they'd disappeared into the rain. The next morning, Ethan went to his office, but for the first time, the glass walls and marble floors felt cold. His assistant noticed the change, too. He wasn't snapping at people or buried in endless paperwork. Instead, he sat at his desk, staring at the rain outside, thinking of a little boy with a big heart and a mother who carried the weight of the world with grace. Later that week, fate intervened again. Ethan was driving home when he saw a familiar figure at a bus stop. Grace, holding a grocery bag, trying to calm Liam, who was crying because his school project had broken. Without thinking, Ethan pulled over. "Need a ride?" he asked. She hesitated, clearly unsure, but the exhaustion in her eyes gave in. She got in. Liam beamed when he saw him. "Hey, the dinner man!" Ethan laughed, an unguarded, warm sound that startled even him. They talked as they drove. Grace confessed how hard things had been. Her husband had left years ago, and she'd been struggling ever since. She worked part-time at a diner and cleaned offices at night. The more Ethan listened, the more he realized how small his own problems were compared to hers. Over the next few weeks, they crossed paths again, sometimes by chance, sometimes by choice. Ethan would visit the diner where she worked, always sitting in her section, leaving generous tips she'd try to refuse. One day, he offered to help Liam get into a better school. Grace refused at first, proud and cautious. "We don't take charity," she said softly. "It's not charity," Ethan replied. "It's hope. And I think we both need some." Slowly, walls began to fall. Grace started trusting him, and Ethan started feeling alive again. He began volunteering for small community projects she mentioned, showing up at Liam's school events, learning what it meant to care again without expecting anything in return. And somewhere along that journey, love found its quiet way back into his life. Not loud or dramatic, but gentle, healing, and patient. Grace never tried to fix him. She just listened, smiled, and let him rediscover himself. Then one evening, months later, Ethan invited them both to the same restaurant, the Amber Lounge. This time, he didn't wear a suit. He wore a simple shirt, a nervous smile, and a heart finally open to tomorrow. When Grace arrived, she looked radiant, still simple, still humble, but glowing in a way that made the whole room fade around her. Liam ran up to the table and laughed. "We're back at the fancy place." As they sat down, Ethan's eyes drifted to the chair across from him, the same one Laura once sat in. But instead of pain, he felt peace. Life had not taken something from him. It had led him here, to the chance to love again, to be part of something pure. Grace looked around nervously. "Why here?" she asked softly. "Because," Ethan said, his voice steady, "this is where I stopped waiting for the past and started seeing my future." There was a long silence before she reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "Ethan," she whispered, "you already found it." And at that moment, as laughter and warmth filled the air, it felt as though Laura herself was smiling somewhere above, content that he had finally let life back in. Months turned into a year. Grace and Ethan became inseparable. He never tried to change who she was or where she came from. Instead, he built a foundation that included her dreams, too. He helped her open a small bakery she'd always wanted, right in the heart of the city. It was called Graceful Mornings, and every morning Ethan would stop by, not as a CEO, but as a man who finally learned what mattered. Liam grew attached to him, following him around, asking endless questions. One night, after tucking him in, Ethan turned to Grace and said quietly, "You both saved me." She smiled, tears glistening. "No," she whispered. "You saved yourself. We just reminded you how." Ethan looked at her for a long time before finally saying, "Then maybe it's time I make it official." And that night, in the simplest, most heartfelt way, he asked her to share his life, not as a rescuer or replacement, but as a partner, an equal, a miracle he never saw coming. The wedding was small, just close friends, a few employees, and Liam standing proudly as the ring bearer. When the vows were exchanged, Ethan's voice broke slightly as he said, "Sometimes, love doesn't come when you look for it. It finds you when you stop hiding." There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Years later, people often asked Ethan how a billionaire CEO met his wife. He would smile and say, "A little boy asked if his mommy could sit with me one night, and the rest was destiny." And every year, on the same date he once spent alone, he still returned to the Amber Lounge. But this time, he didn't come to mourn. He came with Grace and Liam to celebrate the night that reminded him how love can walk in quietly, wearing worn shoes and carrying a heart full of hope. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Every click helps us share more stories that remind the world that kindness and love still exist. Special request: comment below. I still believe in second chances.